happy you could join us on. We've got two to decide from. This is the same case on Monday, and we ended up just going with both of them. But I feel like maybe there's a clear favorite. I don't know. The food ones don't always work for Shayne because he's got a good healthy diet like most of us should have. I'm gravitating that way, getting the sweets out of it and all of that kind of stuff. But we have National High Five Day and National Eggs Benedict Day. I can't see you eating a lot of Eggs Benedict, the bread in there.
I'm not going to lie. I love Eggs Benedict.
Okay.
I haven't had it in a while, but I think the first or second, I don't remember. But one, I used to live in like St. Pete Beach area during my off seasons. And there's this place I used to walk to called Hurricanes. It's right on the street, kind of right across the street from the beach. And I used to love getting breakfast there. And I would always get the Eggs Benedict. And I don't know if it was because I had it for the first time there or if I just don't remember. But I just remember how much I loved it just because it was different. And so I'm a big fan of them. Haven't ordered them in a while. And High Fives, as much as I like High Fives, I don't know that it's something that everybody does a whole lot of anymore.
Well, it's kind of changed to the bump, right? To like the fist bump.
It's the bump. You know, for me, like when I would kick a field goal, I had like kind of a hand clasp with a headbutt celebration that I did with everybody. That
was with everybody, not just the holder?
Mostly the holder was the main guy.
Okay.
And then everybody else, like all the other guys on the team, saw that. So then all the linemen would come up and they'd all headbutt me as I'd get ready to go off the field.
That's what I think of when I think of a kicker celebration, because obviously you thankfully didn't have as much contact. You had a lot of contact for a kicker because you're up there on the tackle list of all time for kickers, but thankfully not as many points of contact as some of your colleagues on the team. But I do think of the kickers of being hit in the head a lot because after you hit a field goal, it's like that's the celebration. Everybody's either headbutting you or hitting you on the helmet.
Yeah, with slapping of the hand. And there's nothing louder than one of those old helmets when someone's hand hits it and it just reverberates into your ears. It's a very loud sound. But the headbutts, I don't know. I don't think they were out of control. But maybe that maybe there's a few things that some of my flaws that are mentioned to me every now and then at home. Maybe it's because of those headbutts. Who knows? That might be my my neurocognitive issue is through all those headbutts.
I feel like you might as well use it. You might as well play that card. It's a good card to play every once in a while. I mean, because it is a lot of contact, not just with you, but I think of that with a lot of the kickers. That's kind of when I think of, okay, blank kicker makes a kick, that's the celebration that I kind of envision as a lot of either headbutting or, the big guys, the big linemen that are out there on the field, boom, smack on the head, 300-pound guy, 300-pound guy, 300-pound guy, as you're kind of moving through the line. So, although they're doing it as like a sign of affection and congratulations, I'm sure that's a heavy hand that's contacting your helmet.
Yeah, most of those hands have cubic inches that are up there in size, and there's a little bit of density that comes along with that adds to the, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So when the hand hits my helmet pushes my head the other opposite direction, and that probably plays into a little bit of that. But I don't think I ever walked off the field with a bell ring or seeing stars or anything. But definitely, for some reason, the headbutt just became my celebration, even in high school. So I never really did a whole ton of high-fiving. And I think kids get more into handshakes and other stuff now besides the high five. Yeah,
there's like the whole kind of half hug thing.
Yeah,
you kind of grab your hands and then go around the back. So that's it's changed here. Well, it makes me think of actually one of the guys that we were going to talk about a little bit today, because was it Mike Vrabel that headbutted one of his players and got in his nose bled? I think it was Vrabel. That's happened a couple times.
I'm not sure, but I think it was him actually that did that.
because he's got kind of, I mean, obviously he's got that mindset, and then I think he just kind of forgot that he didn't have a helmet. He was thinking he could take it, and then he was fine.
Yeah.
And then he didn't realize that I think the bridge of his nose was actually
and I had a teammate in Houston one time. His name was Brian Cushing. Okay, really good.
I remember him.
Really good.
Long blonde hair.
No,
didn't he have long blonde hair?
No, he had kind of. You're thinking of. I'm blanking.
I remember Cushing. Well, there was AJ Hawk, and there was the other linebacker for the Packers that also had long blonde hair.
And we had a
Clay
guy,
Matthews Jr.
We had a guy. I think he played at University of Arizona. I'm blanking on his name. This is part of the headbutt problem.
Okay.
But Brian Cushing, he had more like the pretty boy dark hair.
Okay. Then I'm thinking of the wrong face but I do remember the name for sure.
Yeah. So Brian got into a scuffle with someone after a play, and then his helmet got knocked off. And then while his helmet was knocked off, he went and headbutted a guy with a helmet and busted his nose. Like the skin just split right in the middle of his nose, and it just blood gushing all over his face. And he just continued about his day like nothing happened. And I think that's now put into a lot of his little highlight films that you see of him.
Well, I feel like that's a football player in a nutshell. Like, hey, I can headbutt you without a helmet. Like, I'm tough.
Yeah.
But, and it's true that they're tough. But I can see that. I remember one play. It was Jason Witten, I believe, and he had caught a pass kind of like in the flat, and then he had the whole team basically catch up to him, and his helmet popped off, yet he had like 5 guys on his back, and he was still going, and that was there's always plays like that, I feel like, where I mean your helmet pops off. I haven't seen a lot of people stop when their helmet pops off in the middle of a play, but the reason why I bring up Vrabel is because although people know that we don't really go with like kind of the salacious part of because Shayne being a former football player, we try to kind of keep things everything above board. That's where my interest lies. I don't like necessarily the grabby headlines and okay, let's gossip about this person or that person. But the issue with Mike Vrabel and Diana Rossini that people might be familiar with if you're football fans, because it's been everywhere in the news. I don't really care to discuss the nature of their relationship or anything. I don't really think that's much of my business anyway.
And what do we really know about it?
Exactly. And as Shayne pointed out before the show, you got to be aware that AI is very prominent now, and you don't know what's what as far as pictures go and all of those kinds of things. But it did make me think of the journalism as a whole and how that is kind of an interesting relationship when you have these beat reporters and journalists that are in the locker rooms and basically have free access to the locker rooms. And I wanted to explore your perspective of that, Shayne, because it has to be kind of interesting. It's like, that's a locker room. You've been very forward about the fact that you don't necessarily, some of those things that are in the locker room stay in the locker room. Mm-hmm. I guess unless there's a reporter in there, then it doesn't necessarily stay in there.
Yeah, and honestly, it's a real tricky situation that actually carries a double-edged sword. And so what I'll say by that is I had never, I'm not going to say what team it was with, but there was just a younger, attractive female in the locker room while all the men are changing clothes and they getting interviewed while they have a towel wrapped around them, or some guys are half dressing and as other people are being interviewed. We'd never see that in the WNBA, where men are walking through the locker room. I don't know if they've made that rule or not. I have no idea if they even have open locker room time as they do for some of the male sports. But what that does is it brings forward an issue of even consensual dating, right? Like, what if that girl makes an advance to one of the guys or reaches out in his DMs and says something to him? Okay, more than likely the guy's going to be like, hey, sure, cool, let's hang out. But what if the guy reaches out to her, and we've seen that, okay, and let's say she's not into it, all of a sudden that's a harassment case. That's something going on in a very bad spirit of light optic look, and I think we saw that with Brett Favre. I think we've heard of it in other situations, but But what if that other person reaches out and someone's receptive to it? That creates a whole nother dynamic that creates an issue, which is part of the reason why, they have rules within the organization about, non-fraternizing with females and males and things like that. But now you've got reporters in there and, what if a man who is single and wanted to advance an invitation to someone, respectfully, how is that going to be viewed by the outside world? And if it happens the other way, how is it viewed by the outside world? And then when you hear about these things that happen with coaches and people that are married or whatever, I think you have to respect human nature, that certain things are going to happen if the opportunities are there, but also you have to hope that people have enough willpower not to do certain things. But, I think you're asking for trouble, but then how is it fair to say, well, they can come in a locker room and you have the same job as them, but you can't go in there? So it's a double edge. Like I can see both sides of it, but I think it's asking for trouble.
That's why I wanted to ask about it, because there are a lot of layers to it as a whole. Like you said, these are adults. Everybody's adults, and you're going to have, if you have two single adults, then it's not uncommon to date in your workplace. When I used to work in intelligence, that was very common, because it was like, okay, if you date outside of this, you can't really share much of your life like you would with a normal partner. If you work in intelligence, you can't come home and say, well, what did you do today? Sorry, that's been redacted. I can't tell you. It's not going to go over well with your spouse if that's how you have to deal with everyday life. In the NFL and in these sports, there's not necessarily the same kind of structure, as far as, obviously, all your coworkers, outside of maybe there's some female coaches now and stuff, but all your coworkers primarily are men. So there might be some other positions that you kind of work with that may be female, but yeah, it can be problematic. But when I saw that headline, that's what it made me more think of, because again, I don't care for the gossip stuff, the Page Six, sure, the TMZ. Apparently TMZ turned that story down, so that's kind of, you got to keep that in mind. If TMZ's turning that one down, then you got to think twice about it. But it is an interesting dynamic, and I'm curious how it's kind of evolved too. Did you see the evolution of it when you were on the coaching side of things? Like, has it evolved much over, like, since you were playing until now, because of maybe some of these things that we're talking about?
I don't really know. I didn't really have access to a lot of the media interaction with the players. The only time I ever saw the media was on the field.
Okay.
Because we were never really in the locker room, and college sports doesn't have open locker room where the reporters can come into the locker room. They usually have a kind of a press conference room set up, where the stars of the game are asked to come in and give interviews there, or it's out in the hallway or something after the game. I don't really think there is an open locker room policy for college football that I can remember.
Yeah, that would be even more.
But even at that, the coaches were in a different locker room, so I wouldn't have seen it either way. And then other than that, I never paid attention to it, because I was usually running off the field to get back in the locker room as fast as I could, so I could start my work, so I could try to go home as fast as I could.
Right. Yeah, it is an interesting scenario, but I thought worth the conversation, because all these things are more nuanced than people give. Would they just see the headline of, okay, well, Rossini and Vrabel and what's their relationship? But I think it's good to understand what the nuance and what the interaction is with all these folks, because there's probably some of these things that are going on, like Shayne's saying, without outside knowledge, but nowadays it's harder to do that because everything is very highly publicized. They were at a resort, so people took pictures and sold those to outfits that are paying 5-6 digits for things like this, which is an amazing statistic, but it's true. But yeah, I'm glad we had the conversation in a more nuanced way than just talking about the relationship or what have you. But we're going to take a quick break and then bring on our next guest, Mark Levin. So he was a salary cap expert for the NFL, so he's going to educate us a little bit on how the salary cap works, especially ahead of the draft, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions for him. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. We're happy to bring on this next guest. We, as listeners of the show know, we like to pay kind of deeper attention to the deeper subjects in football and as a whole. You've got a lot of things that are underneath the surface that there's not enough education on, and we are bringing on Mark Levin. He is and was a salary cap expert in the NFL, worked for the NFLPA for years, worked for Washington, and now he has a consulting business where he advises people. And so we're happy to bring him on and talk with him. So welcome to the show, Mark.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, definitely. So my first question for you is do you remember? So my co-host is Shayne Graham. Do you have you worked with him at all before?
I don't think I've worked with him directly. I certainly worked with his agent numerous times.
Well, that's good. Well, yeah, take us through kind of what you did in your various roles, because you've had a long, storied career here.
Yeah, well, I mean, my main role, especially at the Players Association, was assisting agents, the ones that are certified by the NFLPA, with a whole bunch of stuff, mainly helping them negotiate their contracts or their clients' contracts against one of the 32 NFL clubs. So, for example, an agent would call or
but a little shaky.
Yeah, I think you're cutting out a little bit, Mark.
Am I? All right. Is this better?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. All right. So an agent would get an offer from a club, one of his clients, and the agent would information. And we would discuss the offer. We would discuss the good points, the bad points, or there were certainly more bad points than good points if the offer is coming from the club.
Hey, Mark, we're losing you here, so I think we're going to try to reconnect with you. But my producer Mike's going to try to reconnect. Can you call back in?
Yeah.
And then we'll patch you back through. Thanks, Mark. Well, that's one of the reasons, because I wanted to have that discussion with you on the air, Shayne, because this is a part that we haven't talked about. We've talked about it somewhat from the financial side of things, which I want to have that conversation further eventually. But the whole agency thing is a part that we haven't talked about much.
Yeah. So, my first experience, and if he's able to patch him in, he can probably listen to what I'm saying, and he may have even been a part of this. When a team and an agency try to negotiate, they have to do everything within the confines of what the collective bargaining agreement allows for. So when that team allows this whatever offer, I'm sure they maybe go through Mark to even send that offer, and then when a team takes that offer and accepts it, or whoever sends an offer, however it happens. So, for example, I was a restricted free agent in 2000 after the 2003 season. That meant that my team gave me a certain value tender, which meant it gave me X amount of dollars, more than the typical minimum. But then it meant there's a compensatory pick and certain things like that the team would gain or lose depending on if another team took you off their roster. So I got an offer from Jacksonville. Jacksonville also offered some guarantees in that contract, and when I signed it, I think it's called an offer sheet or something. I signed it. That meant Cincinnati then had the chance of right of first refusal, which meant they had the opportunity to match it. So they matched it, and then I think they sent the contract into arbitration to nullify the guarantees that were in it, but we found that those guarantees fell within the guidelines of whatever needs or contractual things that you could actually use. So I ended up making those guarantees. They were all incentive based. I made them, so it all worked out. But that was the first time that I knew that it wasn't just this much money. That this year, I knew there was more to it. So Mark knows way more about that than I do.
Well,
I'm back here, guys.
Okay, great. Yeah, glad you're back on. Yeah, Mark, that's kind of one of the interesting things that I see. That's why I wanted to connect some of these dots. We might have you on for multiple appearances because there's a lot of nuance to this subject. But we're a Michigan-based podcast, so listeners are familiar with Alex Anzalone. Played with the Lions.
Right.
He had a negotiation and tried to renegotiate before this past season, and then went to a new team. He's gotten a little, let's say, combative on social media with the Lions social media team and talking more about the contract process. But again, that part doesn't really grab me. It's the deeper part, but it's the idea that he's talking about, hey, I don't even see some of these things from the player perspective because my agent's dealing with so much. That's why we wanted to have you on, because you're familiar with the agency part of this better than, almost anybody.
Yeah, so, I can just, if you want me to just pick up where I left off as far as the role that I was playing.
That'd be great.
Yeah, so as I said before, the agent gets an offer from the club. Then the agent would send that over to us at the PA. We would discuss the offer that the player received, or the agent received on behalf of his or her client. We would discuss its good points, its bad points, and then we would formulate an argument, a counter proposal. We would discuss negotiation strategy. What are you going to ask for, and when are you going to ask for it? You don't necessarily ask for everything all at once. You want to, you got to learn how to play your cards when you're negotiating these contracts. So through the step-by-step negotiation process, the agent sends an offer over, the club will send it back. The agent sends it to the PA for further discussion, and eventually, hopefully, both sides get an agreement. And being working for the players for 37 years that I did, hopefully, more often than not, the agreement is better for the player than it is for the club. Doesn't always work out that way, but you don't necessarily always meet in the middle. Sometimes you're meeting on the team side of the middle, and sometimes they meet on the player side of the middle. But the end game, obviously, is to get a deal done, and that's the role the PA plays. We don't tell the player not to sign. I still say we. The PA doesn't tell the player not to sign, but they'd certainly provide the agent and the player with their advice. But at the end of the day, it's the player's decision whether or not he wants to sign a particular deal that's put in front of him. And then, other things that come up in a player's career, injuries, benefits, all these type of stuff. These are questions the agents, or the good agents, I should say, would call the PA and ask questions about, and not just assume they know the answer on their own. So I got involved in that a little bit. I'm not a lawyer, so I didn't get involved in any type of grievance proceedings or the actual representation of players in disputes. But I would have been leaned on for my expertise in the salary cap area if there was a dispute or something like that. So, and then also with the certification of agents, there's a whole process that they have to go through in order to get certified, in order to remain certified, which is required. The NFL clubs are not allowed to negotiate with anybody that is not certified, or the exception to that is negotiating directly with the player himself if he's unrepresented. So that was the bulk of my job at the PA. And when I worked for the Commanders, I guess I should say, when I worked for the Commanders for 2 years back in 2000 to 2002, I switched sides in the negotiating table. I was now negotiating on behalf of the owner and the GM of the Commanders against agents and against the players. Again, the end game obviously is to get a deal done and everybody's happy. So the 2 years I spent at the Commanders were, to me personally invaluable as far as learning, because then, seeing both sides of the negotiating table, and then I was fortunate enough to get a job back at the Players Association, where I remained until last year when I decided to leave.
This is almost like my old job here, Mark. You were in intelligence. You were on one side and then counter intel. Shayne, he was on your side and then he was on the other side and then he's going back. What made you switch back and forth, Mark?
The opportunity to work for a team had always sort of, not always. I mean, over the years preceding my actual jumping over to the team, I had thought about it. I had a couple of other teams. I grew up in the D.C. area. I was a huge Commanders fan at the time. I'm no longer a Commanders fan. That's a different story. And it was more money. I'll just be blunt. They offered way more money than paying me. And I figured I'd just try something, a new challenge. I knew it was going to help me grow professionally. It just didn't work out with that organization and who was owning it at the time. So then, fortunately, I was able to come back to the Players Association as the head of the department. That was probably, other than having a fantastic wife and fantastic kids, the best thing that ever happened to me is to be able to come back to the Players Association after my 2 years at the Commanders.
Well, it's funny. So the NFL kind of pulled the same move. I think this was right around that 2010 lockout negotiation, when there was a guy that had a very high leadership position within the NFLPA who all of a sudden ended up in a very high leadership position within the NFL. And I think you know who I'm talking about.
You wouldn't be talking about a guy named Troy Vincent, would you?
So I thought that was interesting, because now all of a sudden, the learning experience you gained in your years with the club, you're able, obviously use that to your advantage, I'm sure, see both perspectives. But then I just remember it kind of was, we thought as NFL, members of the PA, that was kind of a backdoor, I don't know. I think we took a little bit of an exception to that when that happened.
Yeah, there was a little, rumor and innuendo as to actually what went down, which I honestly don't know. But yeah, that's a good analogy there, Shayne.
It is interesting to have kind of the sides flip flop. It makes sense because you're learning the totality of the negotiation. But I guess it's a testament to you, Mark, that you got hired both then on the team side, which makes sense. They were used to being on the player side. They knew you had the experience there. But then to be hired back by the NFLPA is a pretty big vote of confidence there. Yeah,
well, one thing I've learned, you don't burn bridges, right? When you're leaving one job or another, especially in the business of sports, where it's a huge business, but it's very, very, I don't know if incestuous is the right word, but everybody knows everybody, right? And you never know whether when you leave a job, whether you're going to run into somebody 5, 10, 15 years down the road that may be able to help you again. So I always made a point that the two times that I left, the one time I left the PA to go to the Commanders, then coming back, I didn't burn any bridges. I left on good terms. I was able to maintain relationships on both sides of the coin there. But the other thing that was professionally for me, I was at the PA when the CBA was first negotiated. The basics of the current one in 1993. I learned the salary cap on the ground floor. I was provided the CBA by Gene Upshaw. And he really gave me an ultimatum. It's like, you either become our salary cap guy or you're not going to work here anymore. Because for other various reasons, they were making a bunch of staff changes at the time, all this other stuff. I'm like, well, shit. Oops. Heck, I didn't want to leave. So I said, I'll learn. And I learned from the lawyers on our side, the PA side, that literally wrote the CBA along with the lawyers on the management side. So I was put in a position that not many other people in the business of football were put in. So I had some unique experience, which I think was attractive to the Commanders. I had established very good relationships with a lot of the agents who recommend me to go to the Commanders. But once I got to the Commanders, I knew pretty quickly, within a year. I did a 2-year contract to go to the Commanders. Within a year, I knew this wasn't the right place for me. And it wasn't more because I found myself working against the players. It was solely because of the ownership of that team. And so I called Gene Upshaw back, who I still had a very, very good relationship with, and said, Gene, whatever you can do to get me to come back, I need to come back. And it all worked out. And I didn't leave for 25 or 23 years after that.
That's great. Well, and tell us what you're up to now here, because now you're kind of more in the consulting space, right?
Yeah. So me and a good friend of mine who was a lawyer at the PA, we both left early last spring to open up a consulting company. And he's a lawyer. I'm not. We're both basically doing the same exact things that we were doing, just not under the umbrella of the PA anymore. I'm still advising agents on contracts, on market value, still answering questions about the CBA regarding player rights. My business partner, Todd Flanagan, as an attorney, he's representing agents in disputes against other agents. He's representing players in disputes against universities about some NIL stuff. So we're more or less doing the same stuff we were doing. We were just operating for ourselves now and trying to generate the business, our business. And, we have a few clients. We don't have a whole lot, but we have a few. And the other big part about our business is for folks that are wishing to become certified by the PA as a player agent, they have to pass a test that the PA. Both Todd and I were two of the main writers of questions for the exam for the last 22, 23 years we were there. So we provide test prep services to folks who have applied for certification, are going to sit the exam coming up in July. We have a whole month of classes scheduled coming up in June. So if anybody out there is listening, has already applied to be a certified agent and wants some test prep, you're not going to get better prep than from two people who actually wrote most of the exam in the last 20 years.
Nice. So I have a question. I'm a little curious.
Yeah.
So with the current landscape of NIL in colleges, you talked about how you got involved with disputes. Are you guys involved at all in any of that when it comes to, just, I don't know if it's disputes or negotiating or anything and helping out or just involved in that space? And if you are, I imagine it has to be very confusing because I think every state has slightly different laws, and then you've got the NCAA rules, and everything just seems like it's very just chaotic.
Yeah, we're going more in that direction, I think. We're not involved a great deal of time. The thing that we're working on that I can't really talk about just yet, but we're getting more involved in that NIL space. So I think, the signs are going to be pointing that some of our business is going to be a little bit more focused in that area in the coming months to a year. But up until now, we haven't really put a whole lot of emphasis on that because neither Todd nor I knew a whole lot about that. Consultants, you don't want to go out there and try to pull wool over anybody's eyes that a particular part of this. We weren't pretending that we knew anything about it, but we're learning this week. That is going to occupy more of our time come in the next year or so.
Well, that's interesting that you're working on some of the NIL stuff and kind of that's an ever changing space. So if people are looking for you, well, we got to get you out of here, but we'll probably talk to you again. But if people are looking for your services or want to learn more about you and your social media, make sure to direct the people to where they can find you here.
Oh yeah, so on the internet, it's profootballconsulting.com. We're on X at Pro 2025. So that's Pro Football 2025 on X, profootballconsulting.com. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm on Facebook. We're not both Todd and I are X years old, so we don't really have any business being on Instagram. So that's how you can find us.
Be sure to follow him. A lot of expertise there, especially with the ever-changing landscape and both the pro and college spaces here. But we appreciate you joining the show, Mark, and we'll look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Yeah, appreciate it. Have me on anytime, and apologize for the issues earlier.
Oh, no problem. But appreciate the time.
Okay, guys.
All right,
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Mark.
Take care.
Thanks to Mark Levin. Appreciate him joining us. We had a little bit of a communication issue there, but we'll make sure to work that out for the next time because there's a lot of great information. Speaking of good information, we're going to bring on Daniel Flick next. He's a mock draft expert, works for Sports Illustrated, and he'll take us through his thoughts on the draft, especially from the Lions' perspective. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on this next guest. He's a fellow Hoosier here, but he's national now, so we can talk some Hoosiers, but that's actually one of the subjects that I want to talk about. This is Daniel Flick of Sports Illustrated. He's been on the show before to talk about the Hoosiers, but he also does a mock draft for Sports Illustrated, and there's two main topics that I have for you here with on the Lions and the Hoosiers, because I wanted to talk about what you think the Lions are going to do, and I feel like our Hoosiers are a little underrated here in the draft.
Yeah, man, I'm hyped as always to hop on with you, and really excited to hear what you got for me. Let's do it.
yeah. So I'm going to start with the Lions pick. So They obviously are at kind of a pivot point there a little bit at 17, and there's a lot of aggregation in this process. We've talked about that before. Obviously, you try to have a unique draft, but there's different evaluations that happen that everybody goes off of, and so I wanted you to go through kind of your thought process in what the Lions are going for at 17 there, because there's a few guys that are on the board, and then it hasn't evolved a ton. It seems like you're kind of sticking with one main guy there at 17 for the Lions.
Yeah, I like the idea of an offensive tackle there. I just think if you look at what they need, how their spring has gone, all signs in my eyes lead me to think they'll draft a tackle. And it's a good tackle class, right? I mean, this is a really strong tackle class. You got a lot of guys who are highly ranked. I've had Monroe Freeling from the University of Georgia at that spot for, I believe, the last 2 or 3 mocks I've done. So I like that fit a lot. I like Monroe Freeling there, too. I mean, a guy who hasn't played a ton of ball at Georgia, but he's flashed so much, right? He's athletic. He's got all the traits that you want in a guy who can be a long-term tackle as a pro. So, it's interesting. I've looked at that spot for a long, long time with the Lions. I just haven't been able to talk myself out of a tackle. So we've got one more mock ahead of us here that'll come out next week. That'll be the last one. But I kind of have a hard time changing my mind on that one. I feel pretty strongly about that direction.
Now, one of the things that I've kind of seen because we talk to a lot of the folks that are on the Lions beat that kind of have different ideas. I think everybody kind of is settled on tackle. I think it's a good match between need and what there's enough of a plethora of in the draft. But there seems to be a little bit of a difference of opinion as far as which tackle. This tackle class has a lot of differences. It seems like 4 tackles. There's a lot of unique skill sets, and there's been a lot of news on the national media side talking about, well, Caden Proctor, that's a lock for the Lions. He's not getting past the Lions. The Lions are in on him. I'm personally wondering if this is a little bit of a swerve, because there's a big mismatch between what the national media is reporting and what the Lions beat has. And the Proctor is not as high when you talk to people on the Lions beat. They're more in the Freeling and Miller camp. And then it's the national folks that are all saying, "Oh, it's Caden Proctor." I know they've interviewed him. I know they interviewed him at the Senior Bowl, I believe, or throughout the pre-draft process there. And I can see why they'd be interested in him. He's got impressive size. He's got some good athletic traits, but somebody more in the Freeling or really Miller kind of seems like he was almost built for the Lions. It's like if you asked artificial intelligence who the Lions should take, that's them building a tackle for them.
Yeah, and it's funny because he's had an awesome process, right? Like that's a guy who's risen from not really viewed as a round one guy to where if the Lions drafted him, I don't think anyone would be surprised, right? And I don't know. I think the Proctor hype has been interesting because a lot of people, I'm not sure, entirely know where to have him. Because, again, that's a guy who, monster of a human being, with a lot of really cool traits to him that if he puts it all together, you see a really cool upside there. But, again, I think just with what the Lions have historically done in the draft, the types of guys that they like. I look at a Freeling, I look at a Miller, and I say those guys make more sense to me. So now I guess that prompts the question of where do you play Sewell in 2026. But again, I still think this is a draft where there's so many guys, right? Like even the guys from with like Lomu and Fano, like out west, like you've got a lot of guys in this draft that I think there could probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of like 7 tackles drafted in round 1. I mean, it is such a deep draft class at tackle. I still think Miller and Freeling are the two that I've been going back and forth on the most. I don't know. I think the Lions just value guys that you know what you're going to get. And it's interesting because like with Freeling, it's more of a swing. Miller started a lot of games at Clemson. He started, I believe it's 54 starts. I mean, this is a seasoned guy. So I think if you're looking for a safe plug-and-play guy, he's probably a better bet than Freeling. But Freeling's upside is really, really promising, and he obviously held his own in the SEC this year too. So those are a couple of guys who I think are a little bit safer. With Proctor, it's just if he can get his weight in the right slot because he had some issues early on last year where he just looked a little bit slow and sluggish, and then kind of a rare case where he seemed to play himself into a little bit better shape as the year went on, and he kind of handled speed a lot better thereafter. But I think the other guys with the Freelings and the Millers of the world, you kind of know what you're getting a little bit more. There's more of a skill set there that I think fits what the Lions want, and that's kind of the direction that I think they lean.
That's why I think Miller is kind of the forefront of the conversation for me. I totally see the argument with Freeling, but the 54 starts, the fact that he only missed one practice in his entire time, and it was for when he had hand surgery because the timing of the practice conflicted with the actual. It wasn't even that he had to miss it because he broke his hand. It was that he just couldn't make it because it was concurrently timed. So that the leadership characteristics, he was a captain, all of those things just seem to fit the Lions, especially with them maybe moving Sewell over. But I also wanted to get your take on some of the Indiana guys, because does it seem to you like the Indiana guys are a little undervalued? Obviously outside of Mendoza, he's pretty much a lock at number 1. It seems like now they're rising up the charts a little bit, but it seems like a lot of the other Indiana guys started pretty low and are kind of rising up the charts, like Pons and Cooper and some others.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? Because I think for a lot of the season, the raw talent on Indiana's roster really wasn't the story. And I think a lot of people kind of overlooked that aspect of it. I think Pons running as well as he did at his pro day and jumping as high as he did at the combine kind of helped him out a little bit. But I also felt like he was not undervalued, but maybe underappreciated nationally prior to the spring. Because, I mean, he was so good the last few years in Bloomington, right? I mean, I wrote this in our reports as on our site, but he's pound for pound one of the best pure players in the whole draft class, in my opinion. I mean, he's just a phenomenal player. Obviously, his size is a very valid question, but he's just a tremendous, tremendous player. And obviously played above his size quite often at IU as well, and is a tremendous tackler. So I think he'll be a great pro. It's interesting. I think the place I've seen the most shift with the Indiana guys, probably more in that like round 5, round 6 range of a lot of guys who maybe weren't thought of overly highly in season, like Kalen Black, a guy I thought might be like a round 7 to undrafted guy who had a great playoff run and has interviewed very well. I think he's probably going to end up in that 5th round range. It's super fun because like him and Hemby were viewed, I think, more as products of the offense than really good players, and I think Hemby will get drafted too. So there's a good chance that anywhere in the neighborhood of like 9 to 10 Indiana players are drafted. I think there's going to probably be 4 or 5 drafted from round 6 onward. I think Pat Coogan gets drafted. Aiden Fisher probably somewhere in that round 5 range. Riley Nowakowski probably around 6. There should be quite a few of them that are taken, and I think there's kind of a common trait that a lot of those guys have, among others, is they love football and they're going to, for the most part, interview very well because they're all smart dudes. They're all really, really personable, guys. So it's not a surprise to me that they've risen throughout the process. It was more surprising to me that throughout Indiana's run, more of those guys weren't praised or more appreciated on a wider level because, again, a lot of those guys had tremendous years, and it feels like a lot of people are kind of playing catch-up now as we near draft day.
I'll be curious to where Coogan and Fisher both go because I could see them as Lions targets. Pons too. I just don't think the draft position is a fit for them. But we have 15-year NFL veteran Shayne Graham in the studio. We can't get out of this without talking about kickers. We're not talking about kickers enough in the draft process. He's always on the road teaching the next great kicker with his school and everything. So I'm curious who you have kind of as the kickers. Obviously, we only get a handful each year that are picked and that are kind of in the draft evaluation process, even though some get picked up in free agency. But I'm curious kind of how you have your ranking for the kickers here.
Yeah, I have Zavada from Michigan as my top kicker. A guy who had a great 2024 season. It wasn't as reliable in 2025, but he's been very, very good as he's moved further back as in college. So again, extremely strong leg. He'll be interesting because he struggled a little bit in that intermediate range this year, which obviously if you're a pro kicker, you have to be able to hit that kick. So I'll be curious to see how the league values him, but he's my top guy just for what he was able to do as he moved back. And obviously hit a couple of really big kicks for Michigan as well. I also have Trey Smack from Florida as a draftable guy. He was very reliable, and he only missed 1 extra point the last handful of years at Florida. So a guy that I think could be a long-term pro. It's honestly a pretty solid class overall. I mean, there's a handful of punters who I think could make rosters as well. It's a good class in that regard. But I think Zavada and Smack are probably the two that have the highest chance of going, and I think Drew Stevens from Iowa also has a shot as well. Very consistent, had a really good career at Iowa as well, and played in a lot of big games, hit a lot of big kicks there. So really good class. I mean, honestly, probably one of the stronger special teams classes that we've had in a handful of years.
Shane's been nodding his head at some of this. I know he's high on we're both high on Trey Smack. I'm only high on him because Shane's high on him because I have no knowledge there and because I like the name. So that's why I'm high on him. But Shayne being high on him matters 1,000% more. But that's one of the guys you've kind of had your eye on for a while, right, Shayne?
Yeah, I mean, I recruited him out of high school to University of Florida. So I've had a lot of knowledge of him over the years. And I thought he was one of the top high school guys coming out, and then, just really, really strong athletic guy. I think Dominic, is the 2024 season was just amazing for him. And I think that when guys sometimes have little lapses in their consistency in college, I don't think those are things that can't be overcome by the time they get into the pro level. So I don't think that teams are going to look at that as, we can't draft him because he didn't do the best in 2025. I don't see that being an issue. I think Dominic gets the ball up really well. And sometimes Trey, especially at the combine, I think his ball had a slightly lower trajectory at the combine. So I don't know how that translated into his pro day workouts. I'm pretty sure he probably had a day that, that was never looked at as an issue. I just know that was something that was kind of brought to my attention from the combine. But, I don't think you go wrong with all three of those guys. I definitely have Dominic and Trey at the top. And I think a lot of it comes down to, How do those teams, when they interview those guys, how do they perceive their personality and perceive their mental toughness? And how do they try to figure out if that guy's a fit? Because, sometimes us experts who aren't there with them, we can think one thing and a team can think something completely different, and we have no idea. But I think those are safe bets for sure.
Well, that's one thing that is interesting to me about this process. You went through it, Shayne, but the idea of those interviews being such a key component, and 99.9% of people don't get to see what happens there. The players are part of them, but other than that I think is a big part of the process, and we want to assess the traits, and we want to look at the physical traits and the athletic traits. But that mental piece, you can see how they are in an interview or what they've done off the field. But they're putting, I think, a decent amount of emphasis on that person-to-person interview, and I've even seen that with the prospects that I've interviewed on the show here, as far as you're talking to people, and if it seems like it flows a little bit better and they're a little bit more comfortable, I can see how those guys tend to do better in the process. And although that is a little bit subjective, they are trying to assess the mental piece, especially with kickers.
Yeah, and honestly, there's a thing called emotional quotient, and it is where they are trying to come up with a system to rate that, and it's a very tough thing to do. But there are different people, including a company I'm involved with, that are trying to come up with a way that teams can actually try to evaluate and put a valuation to someone's mental fortitude, and right now, it's been hit and miss over the years. You can have guys with great stats not equate into great stats in the NFL. You can have guys who didn't have anywhere near the numbers that these two guys have and have a much longer career in the NFL. You just don't know. I mean, you look at some of the guys that are thriving for long careers in the NFL and were virtual hardly anybody's, if anyone at all, in college. And I think we see that a lot. I mean, why was Adam Vinatieri so good, but he played at a very small school, right? Like, why didn't all the guys who got recruited to the top schools become the ones who played in the NFL? It just doesn't work that way. Sometimes it's the guys that didn't go to the best school that developed and or however their path took them. It's not always just the big name schools and the big name stats. Things can develop over time. And maybe some guys, when take their opportunities a year or two down the road, when maybe they weren't recognized in college, and now they slip into a hole somewhere that a crack opened up and they got an opportunity, and then they become a superstar, and you never even knew where they came from. I think we've seen that with the Brandon Aubreys and the Jake Bates and guys like that.
Oh, there's a lot of circuitous routes that people take, especially at kicker. But yeah, interesting stuff from both you guys. Daniel, I know we got to get you out of here by 8, so make sure to tell the people where they can follow you here. We appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, man, we'll have a whole lot of content coming up over at SI.com. Very excited about that. A whole lot of stuff pre-draft, throughout the draft, and after the draft. We'll have a pretty strong stream of content. So it's always a great week, and very excited for it. And as always, really appreciate you guys having me on.
Definitely. Yeah, always excited to have you on, and hopefully we'll have you on again, and hopefully we'll see some Hoosiers in the draft here. But we'll talk to you soon, and thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, guys. All right.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks to Daniel Flick. Appreciate him coming on. Shayne also had to jet, so it's just Mike and I here. So I'm going to tell you what, after this next segment, we're doing some baseball talk. It may be Shayne Graham's extra points, but we got MLB Mike in the studio. We had a real good game today that he had to fill me in on because I was recording a podcast actually with this next guest. So we've got Jace Sweet coming on of the Michigan Football Network. Him and I and his colleague James have been working on a 7-round mock draft because we apparently didn't have enough to do. So we decided to add that in, but we're working on that right now. And so he's going to take us through not the whole draft or anything, but his thoughts on the Lions, because he he got the Lions, I think there was insider stuff happening there because he chose who got the teams. But we'll have Jace Sweet on after the break. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. I'm happy to bring on this next guest. He's been dealing with me a lot over this past week or so, the audience probably has a lot of empathy for him. But he's been putting up with my nonsense here. This is Jace Sweet of the Michigan Football Network. They do a great job over there, and they're doing a lot of very good draft coverage. They let me participate in it, so that probably weakened it a little bit, Jace. But he's got a good eye for talent. He's a coach, and he does a lot of evaluation. So that's why we want to have him on to discuss not only the Lions picks, but the draft in general. And I haven't discussed this with you yet, Jace, but I was telling the audience that I think there was insider trading there that you ended up with the Lions. I never discussed this with you, but you got the Lions in our mock draft, and I think you may have put your thumb on the scale.
Well, first things first, thanks for the good lead in there, Ryan, and thanks for having me as always. Second thing, actually, that funnily enough happened completely organically. I was like, okay, we're gonna sparse it out first, we're gonna split up the teams that have 2 first-round picks, and then just go 1, 2, 3 from there. And it just so happened that I got the Lions. I know that might seem a little coincidental, but that's just how it went, fortunately for me.
Well, I am glad you got him because it's a 1 in 3 chance. It's James, Jace, and I that split up the teams, and so we all manage these teams and try to take them through the draft process. And we just recorded the first podcast of the first round, and then we'll be doing that, and I'll have Jace plug that at the end, but we'll be doing that throughout the coming days here. But it has been interesting to kind of go through it from all the teams' perspectives, because although we all cover the Lions primarily, obviously we cover pretty much all of football here on the show, and it's interesting from kind of a counterintelligence standpoint to look at what the other teams are going to do. But the main subject I wanted to discuss is kind of what the Lions are going to do, because much like we had national draft expert Daniel Flick on the last segment, and much like his process where he comes out with mock drafts and the pieces change, we even had that with our iterations of the mock draft, because we did a 1 round and then now we did the 7 round, and I think your pick for the Lions changed in between the 2.
Yeah, it did, and that was from a few things. Really, like the things that I've learned on Blake Miller kind of upped his game there for me, and then it kind of was based on where the board fell the first time as well. So I just kind of felt a little bit better going there. I felt, I believe it was Freeling I went with the first time. And, I like Freeling. I do. I just think he's a little more, raw than Miller. And I think with where the Lions are at, Miller makes the most sense in my opinion, and for all the things you mentioned on the show, the durability, the ability to play right tackle at a very high level. He might not have the same ceiling maybe that a guy like Freeling has, but he's got a way higher floor, and I think for that the Lions go with him, with where they're at, wanting to go for a Super Bowl in the next few years.
I didn't get a chance to talk about this with Daniel before. I talked about it a little bit with him, but we'll be able to have a longer form conversation about it, because I know we've talked about the tackles in general, especially in our draft and then relative to the Lions, but the Proctor Miller thing is interesting to me. Obviously, there's Freeling in the mix, and there's some other tackles that could be in the mix for the Lions at 17. But to me, Proctor and Miller are kind of 2 opposite ends of the spectrum of what you could possibly be going for. Proctor's a little bit more developmental. He's a little bit more based on his physical stature and his kind of athletic profile, whereas Miller is, as I've said to you, Jace, is more kind of, it's almost like AI created a tackle for the Lions. Okay, 54 games, multiple time captain. He only missed 1 practice for a broken hand. All of these different things that the Lions seem to look for. And then there's also the fact that he is geared more towards right tackle, which a lot of teams would look at as maybe not as advantageous, because you want a left tackle to protect the blind side. But with the Lions, we're both in the belief that they want to move Sewell over. So then Miller's a better fit on the right side. But the interesting part to me is it seems like when you go to the national beat, a lot of the national folks are saying, "Oh yeah, Proctor to the Lions is a real thing." And then we talked to a ton of people on the Lions beat here on the show, and pretty much all of them are more on the Miller Freeling side. And I'm wondering if this informational difference is kind of feeding some information saying, "Oh yeah, we're interested in Proctor," to try to get people off of the scent here.
Yeah, I think honestly that could go either way because, maybe the Lions beat guys are saying the other guys because they do want Proctor, and maybe, the national guys have the news and they're not going to, skew it in any way because, to help the Lions out or whatever you want to say with that. But I will say both make a ton of sense. Talking about Proctor specifically, yeah, like you mentioned, he is on the exact opposite spectrum than Miller in terms of, his plug-and-play ability. Obviously he has the more physical traits, being 6'7", 350 something. And he's not like a flabby 350 something necessarily either. So, he's one of those guys that I like in this draft a lot, and I think I like him more than a lot of people do. And obviously he has a lot of problems, but, a guy like Hank Fraley could probably fix those. But being from Alabama and being a huge guy and having all the traits, I think that's what Brad Holmes looks for. Proctor before the season was a consensus top 5 pick, and obviously he didn't take the step necessarily to get that. But I do think it makes sense with that. But then with all the things we mentioned with Miller as well, I think that makes just as much sense. And like I mentioned on the show earlier, and I've mentioned many times on Twitter, Lions fans need to get used to those two names because I feel like it's going to be one of those two guys at 17. And even with a trade down, I could see one of those two guys because, there is a chance you move a couple spots down and one of them's still available. So I think that's going to be what it comes down to. It just depends on what Brad Holmes, specifically wants right now.
And I can see in a world in which each of them would be picked, but I'm kind of more in the Miller camp. But I want to talk more about that, and I want to talk about the possibility of a trade down because I haven't done that much, and that would be a welcome sight for me personally. But we're going to take a quick break and come back with Jace Sweet of Michigan Football Network. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Jace Sweet of the Michigan Football Network, having a good conversation about the Lions draft thus far and the possibilities. The one possibility that I would like to entertain here is it's funny because Holmes admittedly and deservingly has a good reputation with his drafting. There's some people that are nitpicking kind of the last couple drafts. I think it's a little too early to kind of do that, especially with the most recent draft. Got to see the health and how those things work out. But he has been drafting a little bit later in the last couple of years. But the one thing that I would like to see him take advantage of, since he is traditionally a pretty good drafter, is actually moving back, kind of more what the Philadelphia Eagles tend to do, because it seems like he cannibalizes his own picks where he wants to have the picks, which is in kind of that middle ground in the 3rd or 4th round. Then he always then he creates a hole for himself and then wants to trade back up. I'd love to see them trade down. I know this is probably not a popular opinion because they got 17. Hey, there's some tackles on the board there. We might move our way out of the tackles, but I wouldn't mind trading down a few picks and picking up something in the middle there, a 3rd or 4th rounder, so he can kind of replenish the stash a little bit.
Yeah, and I think personally I'm always down for a trade down. I love recouping value, and I do think there's not a huge difference. And I know a lot of people will say, well, the odds go down when you go from, let's say, 17 to like 21. Not really necessarily because, historically a lot of first-round picks are busts. So I feel like you got to pick the right player no matter what. With that, I think this is the perfect year for the Lions to trade down because we don't have a 3rd-round pick. It would be great to recoup some of that value. However, I don't know if it's the draft for everybody else to want to trade up. There is a chance that maybe a team, falls in love with a tackle and moves up, or, maybe an edge rusher might fall. But with that, I would be somewhat surprised. Just because this draft is not that top heavy, a lot of teams kind of feel the same way the Lions do, where it's like, well, we can move down 4 or 5 picks and still get relatively similar talent at the position that we need. But I feel like that's going to be kind of the hindrance there because, like I said, I think without the third-round pick, Brad Holmes wants to trade down, and he's probably trying to, especially considering our number one need is tackle, and like we just mentioned, 3 or 4 names that could be available in that 15 to 25 range. So
I think one of the swing points could be a team reaching for that second quarterback, which is most likely Ty Simpson. We've discussed this a little bit in our mock draft because it's not very clear who's going to take him at this point. But with the fact that there's really only one, there's the first one that is 99.9% chance of being off the board, Fernando Mendoza. That looks like the most sure pick in the draft to the Raiders. But after that, there's a lot of teams there's several teams left that need a quarterback. So you got to think they're going to take one. You just have to imagine that they may take one a little ahead of time if they are competing with some of the other teams that need a quarterback and they say, well, wait a minute, okay, if like you're saying, if all these picks kind of in the back half of the round are a little bit amorphous now anyways, why not move up and try to get what we feel is maybe our franchise quarterback? There's just not a strong quarterback class, but that's the question mark of how far above the average kind of grade and pick do they go for a Ty Simpson?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm not a huge Ty Simpson guy. I do not think he will get drafted in the first round. And there's a few reasons for that. Number one, he doesn't have that like prototypical size, arm, that kind of ratio. He reminds me of like a Brock Purdy. And I know that everybody's going to say, well, Brock Purdy's a really good quarterback. Yeah, he is, but he was also a 7th round pick or a 6th round pick. So I feel like, I'm not saying Ty Simpson should be that, but he just doesn't really, he's not very toolsy necessarily. As the GM of the Jets, which I was in our, 7-round mock draft, I didn't draft him, and I thought it this way. There's other quarterbacks that I like that I think I can get in the 3rd or 4th round that might be even more toolsy that, if Ty Simpson's going to need some time to progress, I might as well go with a higher ceiling with a lower, capital put in. So I think most teams also, considering that they have extra, 2027 picks and that's a, stronger quarterback class, I think most teams are kind of thinking that, like the Browns, that's another quarterback needy team, they're not going to be very good next year. So I think they're thinking, okay, let's not worry about quarterback this year. Let's just take best player available and try to build around the quarterback next year. So I think, that kind of leans into it. And also looking at the board, the Lions are sitting at 17. The next quarterback needy team I see is Pittsburgh. And then after that, it's Cleveland. Pittsburgh, I could see maybe taking Ty Simpson at 21, but I don't see them trading up because I just don't see a need to because, past Detroit, you have Minnesota, Carolina, and Dallas. And, obviously Minnesota might need a quarterback, but I just don't see him taking one this year because Kyler Murray and McCarthy, they're not quite giving up on. And I just don't really see a team after that in this first round that would trade up because, Miami got Malik Willis, and then the Jets at 33, I just think are going to sit tight. So, like I said, unfortunately, as much as I would love for a trade up or trade down for the Lions, I should say, I just don't think it's going to happen. And also, the one time Brad Holmes traded down, he got Jahmyr Gibbs. So I think NFL teams might be like, okay, maybe we don't trade down or trade up with this guy.
Well, that's why I'm rooting for it personally, because with his trade ups, there's been some things that haven't necessarily gone 100% to plan, but with his single trade down, there was a multiplying factor with the other picks from the Goff trade, but there was what they got from that haul is just immense. So I'm rooting for that. I don't think it's likely. I'm trying to brainstorm, but I'm with you. I don't think they necessarily will move up, but I do think it's worth the discussion kind of on that. I think that's going to be one of the more interesting points in this draft is when does that second quarterback go? Because it's a lot more projecting that has to go on. It's more based on potential. It's more based on, hey, we need this year. But I agree with you. It's a good class next year. I could see a lot of teams deferring and saying, because I like that strategy better anyways, saying, hey, let's build everything else and be kind of QB ready once we get there. That's the one thing I worry about with Fernando Mendoza for his first year or two in Vegas, because there's a reason they're the number one and they're drafted at number one. They have a lot of needs, and I don't think that he's going to be super well protected like he was at Indiana from day one in Vegas.
Yeah, and I definitely agree there with the Mendoza point, because they did also get Kirk Cousins to sit, or so Mendoza can sit, and I think that's for part of that is because they know he doesn't have that same protection, those same weapons kind of as he did in Indiana, so he's going to need some time. But to the trade up point again, I do feel like there is potential for a different position. Quarterback, not really, but I could see, like I said, a tackle if an edge falls, or let's say, there's some things about Jamad McCoy that are coming out right now with a knee. Maybe he falls a little bit. I could see maybe a team coming up to 17 for him. There's a couple guys that I think have potential to slide just enough that the Lions could, hop on that and take advantage of it.
I feel like Jim Carrey and Dumb and Dumber. So you're telling me there's a chance. There's a 1 in a million chance. But no, you never know what's going to happen. That's kind of the point. But we're going to take another quick break. But I want to talk about kind of the draft strategy beyond the first round. I think a lot of people are settled on the tackle strategy, but since Jace had them for the ongoing rounds, the different positions that they may target later in the draft. So we'll come back with Jace Sweet of Michigan Football Network. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Jace Sweet, having a good conversation about the Lions draft plans and the draft as a whole here. But Jace, what do you see them targeting? Because, when we were doing the mock draft, we were talking about teams with needs, and obviously all teams have some degree of needs, but some are maybe needier than others. So presuming that they do end up with a tackle either at 17 or at whatever their first round pick ends up being, even if they trade down a little bit, I'm curious what you think as kind of the draft strategy with the picks that they have relative to kind of where some of the depth is and some of the players that you like are, because that's the other part of this is you don't know what's going to run, especially as you get later in the draft. We know they have some other needs, but it's about matching it up with kind of the best place to fill those needs too.
Yeah, for sure. And, the draft, in my opinion, the way I look at it, from an evaluation standpoint is the draft is building blocks, right? Like, free agency is there so you can go out and, we're a couple things away. We need a corner and we need, a third wide receiver. We'll go to free agency and get that because it's there and it's available and we know what we're going to get. But in the draft, you just kind of get the best player. However, teams also kind of mix need in there too, because you kind of have to, especially a team like the Lions. We have two glaring needs going into this draft, and I think that's going to be our first two picks, tackle and then edge rusher. Luckily for us, this is a super deep edge rusher class. Like, we're going to see a lot of like second and third round edge rushers in this draft that I think might start day one, but even might be high quality starters by the end of the season. Like, I think there's a lot of, high quality edge rushers there. And then, beyond that, obviously the Lions don't have a third round pick. So that's not great in terms of, finding, startable players. However, we have 2 fourth-round picks and a couple late-round picks, so I could see a trade up there. I know a lot of people are talking about that as well. But, the Lions have a lot of needs. We need corner. We need linebacker help. We need, tight end depth. We need, maybe some more O-line depth, running back depth, receiver depth, another safety as well, because, Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch might not start the season healthy. So the Lions actually have quite a bit of needs. And, they filled a lot of these in free agency as well, but you also would like to see them attack those when it comes to the draft too.
And I think that matches up pretty well with how Holmes specifically views it, as far as he's not looking, and he's said this many, many times, and I think he drafts based on it for the most part, that he's going best available, obviously, on his board, which will be weighted maybe towards the open positions and how they have people graded. But I agree with you, especially on the end piece, because one advantage that they have is they have a type, and that type might not necessarily go super high. There might be a couple guys that will be graded pretty highly that are kind of fitting of the Lions type, like a Keldrick Falk, who we've talked a decent amount about. But there does seem like there's going to be some guys that are available at that 50 range. Are there certain ones that if it does end up being edge and that's what ends up being the highest kind of target for them at that time, are there some names to kind of look out for there?
Yeah, and that's a great point. Like I kind of talked about that quite a bit on our show and on Twitter and other things throughout this process. But edge rusher, like I said, is super deep, and there's a lot of them that fit what the Lions want. Like the Lions love that like strong edge setter, run defender who can also push the pocket with power, because then you're kind of moving the quarterback towards Aiden Hutchinson. So I think that's kind of what they look for. You can, Marcus Davenport, DJ Wanham, these are a couple examples of that. And I think that's been kind of clear throughout the process. We don't really want a pure pass rusher next to Aiden Hutchinson necessarily. And with that said, there is a ton of those, and TJ Parker is a guy that I love who's probably going to go in the first round, unfortunately. You mentioned Keldrick Falk. If he's there at 17, I don't know if it would be crazy for the Lions to take him. I think you have to take a tackle, but Larry Borum being there, maybe the Lions feel somewhat comfortable. They can take a second-round tackle to kind of develop behind him. I don't know if I would do that, even though I love the defensive line player. I think tackle is more of a need right now. But there's a couple guys in the second round that I really like Gabe Akas or Zion Young. Jayshawn Barham for Michigan is another one. And, they all do different things. Like the first two I mentioned, Young and Akas, are kind of similar players. They win with power more, kind of what the Lions like. They're, run defenders. Zion is a huge guy, though, like 6'6", 260. And then, Akas is a little bit smaller than that, but he still, gets the job done. And then you have Barham, who's kind of like a finesse edge rusher linebacker hybrid who has a lot of, edge qualities to him, but it doesn't have a lot of film there, but he's a really high-level linebacker. So I could see the Lions taking a player like that, because we also have a need at linebacker that could kind of be filled with one player, which obviously we'd still need some depth there, but I think that would make a lot of sense if he's available.
You hit on a couple things that I want to follow up on. First off, the Falk thing. So we've talked a lot about the tackles on the show, and when I talk to the beat writers, most of them settle on a tackle. It's Freeling or Miller or Proctor. But Jeff Risdon said on this show that if Falk is available, the Lions are taking him above all the tackles. Now, obviously, that's just his opinion, but he's been on the beat for a long time, and he's a good draft evaluator. So that was kind of curious to me. I followed up with him on it, and yeah, he was set on that. He wasn't saying that was necessarily his want. He just thought that would be number one on their board at that time. But I'm kind of with you as far as the drop. I think the juxtaposition that you have to think of is the drop from the first round tackles to the second round tackles is, I'm almost doing an SAT equation here, it's greater than the drop from the first round edges that they'd be interested in to the second round edges.
Yeah, 1,000%. I agree with that totally, completely. And that's exactly my line of thought. Like, okay, we could take an edge that we really, really like at 17. However, is Keldrick Falk really that much better than a Gabe Akas or a Zion Young or a Malachi Lawrence even, who's a really good a player that I'm a fan of? I don't know. Like, is he worth taking a Caleb Tiernan instead of a Blake Miller? I don't think so at this point. Just simply because, through our mock drafts, every time there's 6 offensive linemen that go in the last 15 picks. It'd be great if one of them fell to us, but there's just no way that happens at 50. So, yeah, I'm right there with you. And, I would definitely, as much as I love Falk, I would love to take him and then maybe trade up, but we just don't have the firepower this year to make a trade and back up into the first round.
Exactly. And that's kind of the third round pick thing, and not having kind of those middle picks back to that. But the other thing that I wanted to highlight too is I think that's kind of a swing spot for them that I think people need to keep an eye on, is how they actually handle the rush off of the edge this year, because obviously last year they elected for kind of the heavy end, the big end, and they're going to go with that again this year, clearly by strategy. But I think there's a lot of different directions that they could go. I remember seeing a press conference where Shepard was talking about the different things around the league, and he was talking about Seattle's situation, and he was talking about how their equivalent of Derek Barnes was essentially Nick Amanawari. And that was interesting to me because then it kind of opened my mind to, okay, yeah, are they thinking that they could kind of get away with kind of a hybrid type player there, a linebacker that's an edge linebacker hybrid, or a safety that's got a little heft to him? I think there's going to be different alignments that they're going to elect to go to that might lend towards different players. Like I'm thinking of a player like Kyle Lewis, who is a linebacker safety combo that I could see them looking at him going, hey, we could use him somewhere in the alignment, move Barnes back, and then have him in certain alignments. So I think movable chess pieces is going to be a goal in this draft too.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think versatility is Brad Holmes' calling card this offseason. He's trying to find guys that can do multiple things at a high level. And, DJ Wanham is a great example of that. I think they signed Wanham because of his edge rushing presence, but I think they also got him because he can also play some linebacker. Which I think is kind of, their calling card this year, like I said. So, I definitely agree with you 100% there. And Kyle Lewis is a player I love for the Lions. I think he's a great fit, and I think he might be there in the 4th round. We would have to get a little bit lucky for him to be there at our first pick, but I would not be surprised at all if the Lions selected him there if he was available.
It's a fun time. It's fun. I know when I was talking to my producer for Monday, Jeff, he was talking about, okay, there's too much prediction. Let's just get to the draft already. But some of the fun is in the predictions. And if somebody like Jace has a lot of knowledge, he reviews the film. He goes through all of these different prospects from his kind of coaching mindset. So it's worth keeping an eye on him and his outfit over there. And then, like I said, we're doing this mock draft that's going to span over a few days here. So be sure to tell people about the mock draft that we're doing and all the good stuff that you're doing over there at Michigan Football Network.
Yeah, and first thing first, thanks for joining us on the mock draft. I know it's been a grind, but it's been a lot of fun going through all these different teams, looking at different perspectives and, how we would do things as if we were the different teams GM. But yeah, it's a 7-round mock draft. It's been a crazy grind over like almost a week now. But, stay tuned for that because there's a lot of picks that probably are a little surprising, but makes sense at the same time. That there's a couple of trades that happen as well throughout the process. So definitely some fun practice before we actually get to the actual draft. And as always, you can find us at MIFB Network on all social medias, and we're live weekly at 6 p.m. The next few days, we'll be live tomorrow for round 2 and 3 of the mock draft, and then next week we'll be live Monday through Thursday. Actually Monday through Friday. So tune into that as, the draft, gets a little closer.
Be sure to tune in to them. Fair warning, I'll be on a lot of those shows in the coming days. So if you don't want to see me, I don't know, mute the part that I'm on. But be sure to tune into Jace and James because they're doing a lot of great stuff. And yeah, this mock draft has been fun because we all put a lot of effort into the process and tried to get into these teams' mindsets. So like Jay said, I'm sure there's going to be some picks that'll raise some eyebrows, but got to keep in mind the 3 guys were doing all of the picks. So we were doing our best, but I think it's a pretty good draft that's forming. So it'll be fun to report on it here. So be sure to tune into them, but we appreciate you coming on the show and we'll look forward to having you back on the show to review the draft at some point.
Likewise. And thanks for having me as always.
All right. Thanks, Jace. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks to Jace Sweet. We appreciate him coming on. And like I said, be sure to tune in to that draft process because I'll be taking part in that. And it's been a fun process. But since Shayne's gone, it's Mike and I in studio. We got MLB in studio. We don't have NFL in studio. We've got MLB in studio. So we're going to talk about some baseball because he's kind of got to fill me in. I was recording the podcast with those guys for the first round. So I missed the tail end of the game. It sounds like it got exciting at the tail end. There was too many rain delays in the game today that made me get off on the timing here. But we'll talk some baseball after the break. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Got a couple of West Side guys talking about the West Side here in studio. We got MLB in studio, and we don't always cover a ton of the other sports on this show because usually it gets filled up by football. But whenever I have access to MLB, I want to talk some baseball, and it has been an interesting stretch for the Tigers here, really even since Monday, because we covered them on Monday. And for those that listened to the show on Monday, we interviewed Alex Urban of the Eat 'em Up podcast, and I had listened to his podcast from last week, Thursday, where it was all doom and gloom, Mike. It was people were down in the dumps, and we were not far into the season, but they were down in the dumps. I think the weather was getting them down, the play was getting them down, the weather was getting the play down. There was a lot of things that were happening, but what a difference a week can make here, because we're a week from when they recorded that podcast, and things are looking a little bit more up.
Yeah, they had a hell of a bad week. But actually, when you got in here on Monday, they had actually swept the Marlins over the weekend. But before that, it was a pretty ugly 5 days, and they lost against the Cardinals on a Sunday, and then they went to Minnesota and proceeded to look pretty bad and weak and anemic, dropping 4 in a row to the Twins. So, but then they come home to the Marlins and they sweep them. They have Monday off, and they just finished a sweep of the Royals this afternoon. And the only reason it was close is because for the first time and probably, let's see, I'm looking, even against the Twins, they didn't pitch all that bad, but they had a pitching meltdown today. They were up 6-1, and all of a sudden, within an inning or two, they were down 8-6, and they had that pitching meltdown that hasn't happened. I mean, they've given up in the last week. They've given up 3 runs, no runs, 1 run, 2 runs, 1 run, 1 run, and then 9 today. So, what a great comeback! 3 in the bottom of the ninth. You just, when you think you can write them off, that's why you don't get too up or too down. It's a really, really long season, and we're just we got another week plus in April yet, so it's a long way to go.
That's really what I try to always tell the listeners, because especially with baseball, I mean, 162 games is a lot of games. I know we know that at the beginning of the season, but I think we forget it at game 20 or 50 or 80, because whenever you're down, don't get too down, and whenever you're up, like you said, Mike, don't get too far up either. You've got to make sure to keep that edge and find that edge. But I think that Minnesota series is you called them anemic. That's one of the better descriptors I've probably heard, and one of the more unique ones.
Offensively.
But yes, definitely.
They weren't getting blown out on any. They lost 7-3 the first game, but the rest of the games they were kind of sort of in it, but they just couldn't have an offense.
And what's interesting to me, and I know people don't often like my defense of some of these things, but these things are explanations. They didn't play good enough. They would say that. Mike's saying that. That's definitely true. But it's always curious to me with the early season, especially when they have to play in these cold temperatures. I know that's tough. I know both teams were playing in it, and that's what everybody's saying back to the radio right now. I hear you. Both teams were playing in it. Minnesota was playing in it the same way the Tigers were, but I do think they struggle in the early going, both maybe in part because of the weather, but they do seem to get off to slow starts in the season. I'm glad to see that slow start hasn't really extended much past those first few series, and now, like you said, Mike, the last 2 series they're looking pretty good now.
Yeah, and now they go away for a weekend series in Boston. They got 4 games there. Monday, they got an 11 o'clock in the morning game. It's Boston Marathon Day, and I think I think they call that Patriot Day out in Boston. So they always start their baseball game at 11 o'clock on that Monday, and then they come home for the Brewers. So, it all looks good right now. Let me, I got to go back to the standings and see exactly where they are, because a day or so, okay. Yeah, they're 1 game out right now. At the worst they were doing, they were 2.5 games out. It's early. Haven't played all that many games, but as bad as they looked, you think, oh my God, they're in last place. Well, they never were. But now, they're 10-9. They're above 500 now, and they're one game out.
Exactly. For working out some of the kinks, I feel like they're in pretty good shape. And obviously, they lost Verlander early. That was a bit of a bummer, but I don't think anybody really thought he was going to pitch the whole season. We would have liked to have seen more at the beginning, of course.
I'm looking for the leadership from him more than anything. I mean, yeah, innings, yes. If anything we can get from him, it'd be great. But no, when we went down to spring training a few weeks ago, I called him on that Monday, and we saw Justin Verlander in the second game we went to at Lakeland. It was just so cool just to have him back in a Tiger uniform, and he pitched that particular day. He pitched into the fifth inning, and in the fifth inning gave up a solo home run. That was his only run. I think he gave up only 2 or 3 hits in those 5 innings, so couldn't ask any more than that. And they weren't, obviously, it was 1-0 because they weren't hitting. And I believe that game ended in a 1-1 tie because in spring training they don't do extra innings. They just say, okay, enough, we're going to move on to the next day. So, yeah, it was great to see him back in the uniform, and they're being really careful with him. He's 43. Let's make sure he's good and healthy and not putting him out there in frigid weather so he could possibly re-injure whatever he's got. I think it's a hip, something to do with a hip or a leg or something. So let's be sure.
Exactly. You want him healthy at the right time. That's really the key. I don't think we're wandering into an Alex Cobb situation where he's not going to pitch all year or anything like that. I think they're going to slow play it. I did hear during one of the games that he was not in the ballpark because he was throwing a session. So he's throwing, he's active, he's up. It's not like he's just languishing on the injured list right now. So that's good. That means they're keeping him active. But I'm with you, Mike. They need him. They need him in the locker room and ideally down the stretch. Sure. Those are the 2 times they need him.
I read an article today. He threw a bullpen yesterday, I think. And both him and the team and the coaches were not satisfied as how it went. I mean, it wasn't horrible. Kinch said it wasn't lights out great. And I can't really say it was bad. But it just wasn't any kind of progression a little bit forward. So they're going. He said he's going with us to Boston. And he'll keep with the same regiment that he's been doing and keep working on things. So, hopefully he's just right around the corner. And when we finally get some nice weather to stay, he can be back in the rotation. But Montero is going to make it tough for him to get back in there.
That's what I was just going to say. The good news is that Montero has looked very good, and we talked about that even in one of our previous conversations about the Tigers, how the pitching is deeper. They obviously added Valdez in addition to Verlander, that some of the young guys, the health hasn't worked out. Job, Olson, we're not going to be seeing them anytime soon. Who knows about Melton? But Montero then became kind of that swing starter, and now, he's looked very good in relief of Verlander.
He got sent down very last pick. I mean, very last, one of the last cuts of the team to go down there. But knowing that any hiccup happens like this, he's probably going to be number 1 to come back, and he was. And he didn't pout. He went down there and did his work. I think he had a start or 2 down there and pitched lights out at Toledo, and so he was more than ready to come back and step in where he had to.
And it speaks to the depth of this organization. I want to come back and talk about a little bit of that because we've been seeing a few guys that are on the fringe that now have, some of them are part of the team and some of them we could see sooner rather than later. I want to talk about some of the young guys here, but we'll come back in studio and talk with MLB about some MLB. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. We usually call this final segment, going for 1 or 2. This will be one of our more odd play designs going for 2, because if we don't have our kicker, we're going to go for 2. But our 2-point conversion is going to involve a lot of baseball, so I don't know what play that is, but we're going with a play that MLB, myself, and our owner for that matter, Scott Pasteur, would like, because he's a big baseball guy. But there's a lot of baseball that even happened since Monday as far as some of the news. And Mike and I were just talking about, so we talked about the idea that Montero moved up and he was the first pitcher that was going to move up. The first positional player, the first batter and fielder that was going to move up was going to be Wencel Perez. And he unfortunately had to. Meadows had that awful collision in the outfield. He's going to be out for a good portion of the year, it seems, with his injuries. So Perez was the next one up. He's a nice guy to have as kind of your your stashed outfielder in the minor leagues, because I was kind of happy to see him. Not that I was happy to have Meadows go out, but as far as if you're going to the minor leagues to get somebody, that's a good replacement there.
Yeah, we're talking about Clark. That's the next hot gun. And if you remember, back up 2 years maybe, I don't know if it was 3 or 2, but McGonigal was kind of a foregone conclusion, but Clark was the big name at the Whitecaps. And then it turned into be Clark was the stud. McGonigal was right there, kind of, sort of. He's in the wings, and then that Braceno, the first baseman / catcher,
Braceno, yep.
And so those 3 got moved up to Erie at the same time, and then McGonigal kind of overtook Clark, and so now he's got to wait his turn. He's still as good as he was. He just Hinch said people were saying Meadows got hurt. Here comes Clark. Well, no. He's still got stuff to work on. He's got a list of things he needs to be working on at Toledo. He's playing well. He's playing well down there, but and he'll get his shot. Just wonder if he's the next position player to come up if something happens, or is Harris and Hinch thinking something else?
It's a good question, because I do think Perez was the right move for this next one. I know people are excited to see Clark. Hey, we're excited to see Clark too. We've been talking a lot with the minor league folks. Emily Walden, who covers the Whitecaps, she's done some one-on-one interviews with Clark. She knows Max pretty well. She knows Kevin very well because she covered them and she did sit-down interviews with them. And I think one of the things that will be interesting about when they bring Clark up, I've made this joke about comparing him to a buddy cop movie, but I do think they make a good pairing together. I think McGonigal is the more likely one to be to the major leagues first, because he really struck, I think, everybody in the organization as a professional from day one. He's the way he goes about his hitting approach, and even though he's a young guy, he just seems like he was ready for the big league lights.
Generational talent.
Yep.
The guy in Pittsburgh, what's his name? Griffin?
Connor Griffin.
He got brought up right away too, and these guys back in our day, way back in our day, Al Kaline, he never played a day in the minors, but those are 1 in a million, and so McGonigal is one of these that just seem to have it all together without having to go all through those steps. And I was a doubter. I thought, keep him down there. I'd hate to have the guy get crushed if he starts to struggle. And look at him. He's batting over 300 right now. Had a triple this afternoon. So, yeah, he's ready for it. And Clark is probably just on his heels.
Which, that's not a bad strategy. I mean, yes, he's worked out well, but you do want to protect those young guys, because they can be made or broken with when they're pulled up. But yeah, Lynn Henning, who we talked to a couple weeks ago on the show, Mike, he was talking about how you might have to go back to Al Kaline to find somebody that was as major league ready in the Tigers organization at this kind of age, skipping over even some of the guys that a lot of the folks that really like the 84 team, when you're talking about guys like Trammell and Whitaker that came through the system. Yep. Nothing against those guys. I think it's just more of a compliment towards McGonigal that Henning was talking about, because he was covering the teams back then. He covered the 84 team. He's been on the beat forever. So to get his opinion on it is interesting. But I think Clark's the more emotionally volatile one.
Right, yeah.
And I think that's the one that you need to protect him a little bit more. But this might just fuel him too. He goes down, he comes up in, I don't know, say July. I could see him being the type of guy that if they're struggling a little bit and somebody gets hurt, they've got a couple consecutive guys that go on the injured list, I could see him coming up and giving them a boost, not necessarily in hitting the ground running like McGonigal is and being a 300 hitter, not in that sense, more hitting the ground running with his playing style, because he's got a lot of energy. I could see that energizing the locker room as a whole.
Exactly, yeah, and he's more brash, he's more outspoken, he's, that's not McGonigal. Total night and day difference on their personalities, but no, you just have to think about over the last few years, when Harris got there, it used to be you go to spring training and you pretty much could halfway through, you knew what the team was going to be. And the last couple of years, it's been anything but. They have depth like they've never had in a whole long time. So it's, it's like Montero having get sent down. And last year or 2 years ago, he would have been a slam dunk. It's not that way anymore, and I guess that's good. Competition brings out everything, best in a player, hopefully. And, yeah, they didn't have that before, so I'm glad to see it.
Oh, it speaks to the roster improvement that those guys are further down the depth chart, but still valuable when they have to come up. That thankfully, Detroit has a lot of guys. The Pistons have this. The Tigers seem to have this. The Lions have always played with this mentality under Campbell that the next man up. They don't have to get ready if they stay ready, and that seems to be the case for this Tigers team too. There's not a lot of egos on it. There's not a lot of guys that are worried about getting theirs. They're waiting for their opportunity, whether they're a situational hitter like a Jahmai Jones at the major league level, or they're one of these young guys, a Perez or a Montero that's not quite as young but got sent down and were kind of the last cuts, or a young guy like Clark that wants to get up there. You haven't seen a lot of hard feelings from these guys, which is a good sign.
Yeah, and well, when we're down in spring training, we saw both the Whitecaps and the Lakeland single A, low A. They both won the championships last year, and they were talking about last year they won. Oh God, how many games did the Whitecaps win?
Oh, it was like a record.
It was huge.
Yeah,
but they also had their studs half the way through the year went to Erie, and the manager Tony Capicelli, he just said it was a next guy up mentality that we've been talking about, and the guys responded, and so. Yeah, I really like what's going on throughout. In these studs, I mean, don't know all the names off the top of our head like will when they get up to the AAA and Tigers, but the front office knows, the coaches know, they know the guys that they know who are going to be coming up in the next bunch of years. So.
This episode is brought to you by Encore Business Group, Ericola Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Williams Chiropractic, Elite Winning Solutions, and Sal's Complete Home Painting and Handyman Services. Shayne Graham's Extra Points with Ron Walsh airs live Thursdays, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern on Jethro.fm.